Outstanding work of our change agents and Dr. Johnny Cruz Craig. We worked on different topics, not just the normal thing. You know, we worked on culturally relevant teaching, social and emotional learning, trauma-informed classrooms, and the whole child, just to name a few.
In terms of what you all are doing and what it means to us and what it means to everyone, education is a foundational key. I think it was George Washington Carver that said education is the key to freedom, which is the tie and the link between education and social action.
Delta pushed early on that it's not just matriculating through a scripted curriculum that may not teach needed life and adaptive skills. We have been pushing through our gyms and other programs that you need to focus on educating the whole person so that our next generation has the basic life skills to navigate and adapt in now an even more demanding and unrelenting world environment.
Good morning and welcome to the DMV DTEC-TAG Who Will Teach Us webinar. My name is Danielle Miles and I would like to introduce to you the DMV DTEC-TAG team, starting with me, Danielle Miles, Veronica Manafay, Joanne Otis, Dr. Candace Boyd Wyatt, Crystal Falls, Keisha L. Chandler, Therion T.J. Baker II, Dr. Renata A. Headington-Jones, Denise Harrington, Dr. Anitra Pete, Dr. Ureth Bowen, Rain Bradley, Terry Pollard, Zule Culpepper, and Angela Van. Our amazing moderator this morning is from our DMV DTEC-TAG team. She has over 25 years of experience as a classroom teacher and school administrator in public, non-public, charter, and virtual schools, as well as worked on the federal level at the U.S. Department of Education. I present to you Miss Angela Van.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So welcome to the DMV DTEC-TAG series, Stories of Injustices in Education. As the world reflects on social justice and equity through a slightly new lens, we feel it's important to discuss how this impacts an authentic desire to best serve our students. That desire led us to explore the topic of who will teach us. Before we meet our panel, we'd like to take a moment to reflect on a message that isn't new. However, it's extremely relevant. Rita Pearson left us this message as part of an amazing legacy as an educator and advocate for children and educators. Let's listen to a clip about why every kid needs a champion.
Know why kids don't learn. It's either poverty, low attendance, negative peer influences. We know why. But one of the things that we never discuss, or we rarely discuss, is the value and importance of human connection. Relationships. James Comer says that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. George Washington Carver says all learning is understanding relationships. Everyone in this room has been affected by a teacher or an adult. For years, I have watched people teach. I have looked at the best and I've looked at some of the worst. A colleague said to me one time, they don't pay me to like the kids. They pay me to teach a lesson. The kids should learn it. I should teach it. They should learn it. Case closed. Well, I said to her, you know, kids don't learn from people they don't like. Can we stand to have more relationships? Absolutely. Will you like all your children? Of course not. And you know your toughest kids are never absent. Never. You won't like them all, and the tough ones show up for a reason. It's the connection, it's the relationships. And while you won't like them all, the key is they can never, ever know it. So teachers become great actors and great actresses, and we come to work when we don't feel like it, and we listen to policy that doesn't make sense, and we teach anyway. We teach anyway because that's what we do. Teaching and learning should bring joy. How powerful would our world be if we had kids who were not afraid to take risks, who were not afraid to think, and who had a champion? Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Is this job tough? You betcha. Oh God, you betcha. But it is not impossible. We can do this. We're educators. We're born to make a difference. Thank you so much.
So with Ms. Pearson's words in mind, we've brought together an amazing panel of educators who strive to be champions for students and teachers every day. So I'd like to introduce you to our panel. First, we have Dr. Desmond Blackburn, Chief Executive Officer of the New Teacher Center. Welcome.
Good morning, Angela. Welcome. Thank you for having me here. As you said, I'm Desmond Blackburn, currently CEO of New Teacher Center. We provide professional development for school systems across the country. Prior to this, I was a district superintendent, a middle school principal, and my claim to fame, having started 25 years ago, is being a high school math teacher. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Dr. Johnny Cruz Craig, the National Project Director of the Delta Research and Education Foundation and the DTEC-TAG project.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Angela, for having us. I don't know if this is where I introduce myself, but this is who I am. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to bring everyone in, and then I'm going to give everyone a chance to kind of share a little bit about themselves. So thank you. So next we have Mr. Corey Dotson, the Talent and Acquisition Coordinator of Arlington County Public Schools. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. Next we have Mr. Aaron Gregory, Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, also of Arlington County Public Schools. Welcome. All right. Next, we have Dr. George Lagon IV, Education Policy Expert. Welcome. We have Curtis Palmore, CEO of the Community Charter Schools of Paterson, New Jersey. Thank you for joining us today.
Welcome. Good morning.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Mr. Jose Vilson, teacher and co-founder and executive director of EduColor. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
All right. So we want to welcome and thank you all for joining us. It's a Saturday morning, and as educators with tremendous workloads, especially in the world of COVID, our team appreciates you taking the time to join us and discuss this important topic of recruitment and retention of teachers of color. So before we start, we'd like to give our audience an opportunity to get to know you just a little bit better. So we'll start with Dr. Blackburn and then keep going in the order that I introduced you. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're currently doing in the field of education. Dr. Blackburn.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. Again, we provide here at New Teacher Center systems of support for systems all across the country, right? Everywhere from the classroom right on up to the boardroom. Our mission is to disrupt the predictability of inequitable outcomes by systemically underserved kids. For me, having been a 25-year educator, it's just tragic that we can walk most halls and most schools across the country and literally pick out the kids who are not on the trajectory to intersect with the American dream. And overwhelmingly, those kids are the same gender and hue as the people who are on this panel right now. So it's alarming, and it's my life's work. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me here.
Outstanding. Thank you. Dr. Cruz Craig.
Yes, good morning. It's such an honor to be here this morning. I am Dr. Johnny Cruz Craig, and I serve as the National Project Director for DTEC-TAG, which is this amazing DMV TAG team that's hosting this particular webinar. And we're doing work across the nation advocating for our children, our future, as well as providing professional development for educators around a myriad of topics. We are equity warriors, and that's who I am, and that's the work that we do, and I'm honored to do it with everybody here to be on this panel. Thank you so much, Angela.
Outstanding. Thank you. Mr. Corey Dotson.
Good morning. I'm Corey Dotson, one of the talent acquisition coordinators with Arlington Public Schools. I co-lead our recruitment efforts, primarily focusing on middle and high school, with over 10 years of HR experience in the K-12 arena, starting with Baltimore City, Arlington Public Schools, Baltimore County Public Schools, and now back to Arlington Public Schools. Glad to be a part of this panel discussion this morning.
We're happy to have you. All right, Mr. Aaron Gregory.
Good morning, I'm Aaron Gregory. I'm the Chief of Diversity for Arlington Public Schools. And my path and my track began probably over 20 years ago, but first started with growing up. I never saw what we're talking about today, which was a teacher of color. I never had that experience, and that prompted me to go to a historically Black college and university, but not knowing that my path and my track was going to take me down the path of education. I first started at the state level as a due process coordinator in the state of Ohio, and worked my way down that track through being regional, as well as working through school systems to close our academic and our opportunity gaps. As Chief of Diversity for Arlington Public Schools, my role is really to examine the conditions of learning and actively work to remove barriers that hinder student success and well-being by leveraging expertise. So really with our office, we're here to promote and look at the responsibility for leading the development and implementation of a division-wide strategic vision to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and that includes staff as well as students. Thank you.
All right, we're glad to have you. All right, Dr. George Ligon IV.
Hey, good morning. Thank you once again for having me. Again, I'm Dr. George Ligon IV. I have over 14 years of experience in the field of education as a classroom teacher, large-scale assessment developer, education consultant, instructional coach, and research associate. Currently, I've worked with over 70 school districts across the U.S., Kuwait and Egypt on several education projects. Currently, I'm continuing my research in critical race theory in education, focusing on policy, the way policy influences outcomes of economically disadvantaged Black students, and traditionally persistently low performance schools. So with that, I provide support to instructional coaching support in addition to working as a research associate for large scale state assessment projects and alignment studies.
All right, outstanding, welcome. All right, Mr. Curtis Palmore.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Curtis Palmore, and I have 26 years of experience. I spent a good amount of that time in the classroom in New York City, and then moved into leadership roles as a principal and assistant principal. For the last 3 years, I've been leading a public charter school district in New Jersey, and also am a doctoral student at the University of Pennsylvania, where I am doing research and wrapping up a dissertation on retention strategies for Black male educators.
All right, welcome, thank you. And Mr. Jose Vilson. Mr. Vilson, I think you're still on mute. There we go.
Gotcha. I'm sorry. I'll try again. My name is Jose Vilson, and I've been a math teacher for the better part of 15 years. And before, obviously, at this point in time, I'm also now a doctoral student at Teachers College, Columbia University, studying sociology and education, trying to understand the intersections of policy, practice, and research for Black and Latinx educators across New York City. And I'm also the executive director of EduColor, an organization dedicated to race and social justice issues in education, where we focus specifically on various amounts of like research, practice, policy as well. So thanks for having me.
All right, outstanding. So now that we know who you are and the expertise that you bring to the table, let's dive in and have a conversation. Like, we really just want to make this a conversation, and we want to discuss recruiting and retaining teachers of color. So for everyone watching today, feel free to share comments or questions in the chat. We'll have a Q&A session, but anything that we don't answer during today's discussion, we'll follow up with after the discussion. So this is a question for everyone. However, kind of based on your current roles in talent acquisition, diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm going to start with Dr. Dotson and Mr. Gregory. Afterwards, anyone else can join and share your thoughts. But what are barriers to recruiting teachers of color?
I'll start, Erin. So that's a very good question. Some of the barriers that I've noticed to recruiting teachers of color, obviously the cost. I think most teacher prep programs are 5 years, are pretty close to that. And you have a significant number of students who are taking on debt in order to finance their education. So you graduate from college, you're offered a teacher job paying $40,000 to $50,000 a year, and that's definitely regional. And you often work beyond normal contracted hours. And so that is probably not going to be too appealing to many. And so and I get that many times people say you don't go into education for money, but here's where I stand on this topic. You ought to be able to follow your passion for teaching, support yourself, and raise a family as an educator. Your quality of life shouldn't be compromised because you chose to become a teacher. I do think that there is biases in tests to become a licensed teacher, which is not an indicator of how effective one would be as an educator. So we definitely need to streamline that process to become a licensed teacher. And then thirdly, this is probably not the most popular response, but I believe wholeheartedly that teachers are our best recruiters. But unfortunately, they can also be barriers to recruiting teachers of colors. Personally, I had an awful experience with a math teacher in high school. I struggled in math. And that teacher, who was a person of color, told me I was struggling in college with math. And so I felt some sort of way, but I didn't let that break me. I went to college, I excelled, and now here I am today, reaching back, trying to get more individuals involved in education. And then one more thing before Erin, in case you want to chime in terms of teachers, sometimes, I'm a part of some of the groups that we have in the DMV area. And oftentimes we'll hear some comments from teachers that kind of make me cringe. And so I understand there's frustration. I get it. It's totally, I get it. But we have to find another way to share our frustration, because that's just adding another level of difficulty as it pertains to recruiting teachers of color into the profession.
Yeah, that's a very important point, because as teachers, sometimes we do get frustrated and share. So just thank you for pointing that out. Our words matter when we speak them out into the world. Mr. Gregory, thoughts?
So I think Mr. Dotson summed it up, you know, and what he explained to us as being some of the barriers. But I also add that, you know, there are many options for African Americans and students of color who are in universities at the college level. We're the best of the best, and the best of the best have many opportunities out there, and they're looking for opportunities that are going to be the better paying jobs, and not seeing the bigger picture. Like, hey, I'm starting here at this starting point, but this may open up some wider opportunities that lead to those better opportunities of being able to financially prepare and take care of our families. So I think if we're able to expand upon that and allow our students to know, like, this is a beginning point at $40,000 or $50,000, but you know, you can very well become an administrator, making six figures or so on and so forth within a short period of time. And you know, knowing that our students really need us, they need to see our faces as windows and mirrors. And if we're able to do that, then we're able to better recruit. I would also say one of the main challenges too that we face with recruiting, again, is looking at the cost of some of those programs, but also how are we going to be able to help our students be able to pass the praxis and pass those exams? What supports are we going to put into place? So I think all of those things play an important role in a barrier that we have to start figuring out how to overcome.
I love your statement about our students need to see us as windows and mirrors. That it's a beautiful sentiment.
Angela, may I add a few other points?
Yes.
So I agree with my colleagues and their points. I think they're well stated. I also think that school districts, respectfully, are somewhat of a barrier as well. When I think about the ways in which we recruit teachers of color, we're usually doing very typical things like hiring fairs and job postings. But I really believe this system was not designed, the educational system was not designed for us. It was designed to dismantle, it was designed to have us at a very low level in terms of our performance. And that's a whole nother probably conversation. But I believe because of that, it's incumbent upon school districts to really find innovative ways to recruit teachers of color. And I'll just share two brief ways in which we're trying to do this. So we've established a partnership with two HBCUs, one of which I graduated from, to directly recruit teachers and literally talking to freshman students. The other is just really looking at how the pipeline of teachers can start in high school. So we're literally starting to talk to seniors and juniors in high school about looking into how you potentially can conceive an idea of becoming an educator, which is typically not in the mindset of high school students. So I would encourage us to look first at ourselves and put the mirror up to ourselves as school district leaders and say, what do we need to change to really make sure that we're putting out different strategies to recruit teachers of color?
Yeah, there needs to be a lot of reflection. Outstanding.
Yes.
I also wanted to add too, and thank you all for your comments, is we have to recognize that HBCUs, for example, are some of the best recruiters that there are when it comes to educators of color, specifically Black teachers. I know when I spoke at Howard University, for example, the amount of investment that there is in that specific school when it comes to the culture building that goes into the teachers that come out of the program at Howard, like that was a big deal. But of course, not to mention the various numbers of HBCUs that are out there that are doing a really great job of making sure that students who come into that program, come out of that program with a full set of skills that has been historically important for Black students. And consider how, like, historically, Black folks have wanted education. It is usually in the top 3 and probably not number 3 when it comes to the importance of education for folks. So it's not for a lack of want or a lack of desire. If anything, I think it's due to the culture and the idea, for example, that we had 34,000 educators who lost their jobs post Brown versus Board is a really big deal. And we need to understand that genetically, and we need to understand that historically, right? We need to understand that, like, even as we started getting into this idea of like shared power across different districts, some districts decided that they just did not want Black teachers at all. So they made their own districts and they made it as white as possible. We need to think about even in places like New York City, that's super liberal, right? The richer the school gets, the less and less Black teachers there are. So there's something systemically happening, structurally happening, that is not allowing for our best and brightest teachers of color, whether it be Black teachers, Latinx teachers, Native American teachers, to actually feel like they belong in our school system, that we need to recognize that wholeheartedly.
I would add in there, continuing this theme of the window and the mirror being the system, the implicit bias that exists in hiring practices that I think we've all witnessed, right? And that is, when I think about Black men, especially, and the wide range, the diversity of who we are and how we think and where we're from and how we show up, yet in hiring practices, there seems to be this funnel of what type of male profile is accepted into mainstream America, into the system, and then promoted to higher levels within the system. So that requires that inside look on the implicit bias. Also, once we do recruit our young Black male teachers into schools, we have to realize that, yes, there may be some social connectivity to the students, especially the ones struggling most, and other Black and brown boys. But we are more than disciplinarians. We are more than the automatic assignment to the most challenging classes. And as a matter of fact, that's a problem in education altogether, where the kids most in need are more likely to receive the teachers who are most novice in the profession. That's one challenge. The outside piece, when it comes to recruiting, we have to understand the economic realities, right? I'm a first generation college kid, and like most of us who come from humble beginnings, we're using education to try to escape poverty, right? And so, because of the narrative we tell around compensation and education, we're not thinking when we're 19 and 20 years old and in college that pursuing education is a way to escape the economic realities of our situation, right? And absolutely, America needs to figure out a much better way to compensate teachers and educators, without a shadow of a doubt. And there are still thriving opportunities for all folks who enter education, especially people of color, especially Black and brown men. There are a wide range of opportunities, and we don't tell the narrative well enough on how you can do good and do good.
All right, so
go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Yeah, so real quick, one of the things that I wanted to say, just to chime in on what everyone is saying, is when we're looking at these education agencies, part of the barriers to me is the lack of investment or focus into the community that you're servicing, right? So when you look at these teacher preparation programs and you look at the prototypical pipeline that people are utilizing in order to try to find teachers of color, like if you just look right into your community, there are a plethora of individuals that are there that might be interested. If you take a place like, I'm in the DMV area, so teacher salary in this area is good in many instances in comparison to a lot of other places outside of this region. With that being the case, like a person, a kid who graduates, say, from a DC public school and goes through whatever teacher prep program has a great opportunity at social mobility just because of the salary that's being paid for a place like DCPS. So where's the investment in the pipeline in recruiting those kids, as someone was saying earlier, at the high school level, you know, supporting them, building their capacity through their college program and bringing them back into the school district to service the community that they're from. Additionally, you have a bunch of parents. Like if we can go and we can take kids from other teacher prep programs and we can train them in a 2-year period to provide the support to build their capacity to come and work into these schools, why can't we do that for the people that's within those communities?
I love how you all have identified not only barriers, but you're identifying solutions, things that people need to take into consideration to be intentional about making a change regarding teacher recruitment. So one of the things that I'd like to ask is, like, we're talking about these barriers, but we should also think about the benefits. So recruitment and retention, it's been a talking point for years. However, it continues to be an issue. So as we elevate the discussion and transition from kind of good intentions, talking about it, to strategic planning and actionable items, let's take a minute to highlight the why this is important. Because we're talking about, this is a whole series on injustices in education. So what are some of the benefits of having teachers and counselors of color, like those non-quantifiable, like different from just increased test scores?
So I can start. I think one of the things we have to realize is that this is best for all kids. The research shows that having a diverse workforce and seeing different ideas, ideologies, they transforms into better student outcomes. Oftentimes we look at problems of practice, but when we have a really cognitive diversity amongst our staff, then we can be able to solve some of those problems. What we know that students need multiple means of engagement, representation, and expression. How does that look? So we're able to problem solve. But why is it most important? Is because we don't live within silos. We live in a country now that's becoming way more diverse, way more racially diverse. So we have to prepare our students by normalizing discussions about race, about culture, and we normalize that by having an expression of that, by being able to see each other in a different light. So I think that was to start the conversation off. I think that's why it's most important, is because our society is becoming more and more diverse, and our workforce needs more and more diverse, qualified students to be able to be in that diverse workforce.
It's really important for people to think about this. We're seeing like questions in the chat. We appreciate the fact that we need to have a diverse workforce. What are, just for the group in general, like, let's think about the benefits just of having someone who looks like you in front of students, teaching you, talking to you, pouring into you.
So I'll begin. I'll continue. Excuse me. When I was in high school, I was told that I was not college material, and that I should consider going to get a trade. And when I graduated from college, I went back to my high school and told my guidance counselor that, I think you were wrong, and that I'm actually happy because I'm becoming an educator. And until that woman passed away a couple of years ago, I was able to stay in contact with her and influence her. And I say that because I open up with that because I think the reality is that, the benefits, like anecdotally, that story and others, is that there's a deep compassion to want to see a child of color be successful with teachers of color. And it's kind of like the auntie or uncle that's rooting for you, the mommy, dad that just wants to make sure you're successful. Like, I see that time and time again with the teachers of color that work in my district or that have worked beside me when I was a teacher. I think the other thing that's really important is just perspective. Like, I am blown away when I hear the perspective that, particularly at least the last couple of years, that the Black and the Black and Latinx educators provide to the conversation in our district about how to best support children. And I hear them delving into like deeper strategies that go beyond the classroom to support students. I hear them talking about bringing up ways in which we could partner with our community in a way that, quite frankly, I just don't see my white educators bringing to the table. And not to say that they can't, but from what I see, again, anecdotally, Black educators, Latinx educators are bringing it to the table because of their deep commitment for the students that they serve.
The other piece, and I think it's been alluded to, I think it's difficult, close to impossible, for children, any child, to aspire to be something if he or she has never seen, right, that thing in front of them, or themselves reflected in whatever definition we have for success. That is crucial, and you can't really quantify that, but it's crucial. The ways, though, you can quantify the benefits. First, I agree with what the brother said earlier. Study impact of diversity around any sector, and you will find that outcomes increase as the workforce becomes more diverse, right? Diversity of thought, background, systems of belief, you name it. Circling back to our young princesses in schools, right? They need to see us, and we need to be around them in order to help them navigate the path forward, right? There are all kinds of implicit and explicit systems of bias that we've all had to overcome. And I believe many of us did so with the help of navigators and coaches and tour guides. So it's tragic for us not to turn around and be those same navigators and tour guides for our young men and women coming up in a system that oftentimes doesn't really value who they are naturally, but seeks to convert us into who the system wants us to be, right? And that's a whole nother Saturday morning conversation.
Yeah, I just want to add to that point. Like, that's one of the things that I'm often like asking individuals and stuff like that. When it comes to like the purpose of education, what is the purpose of education? And, you know, depending on the school that you go to and the students and their interaction through whatever their curriculum is, like they have different perspectives. It's not something that's streamlined from federal, state to district. It's a different perspective on what that purpose is. The impact of having Black people, our people of color, supporting students, you know, in more diverse ways than what we're getting in general, is that with them being there to provide that level of cultural relativity, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is, I understand you, I connect with you. I had a fourth grade teacher, Mr. Jones, who was my only Black male teacher that I had throughout my entire educational career. And like the influence that that individual had and the support that he provided was real relevant to the kids that we are within that community. And oftentimes people outside of those communities can't relate, and they can't bring that level of support that kids need in order to help move them along where they need to go and building, you know, their capacity to be whatever it is that they want to be versus what we think the system intends for us to be.
I also wanted to add on to that. I'm sorry, I'm gonna let you get the last word because, you know, so just for this point too, I want to kind of sum up what my brothers has said here on the panel, which is that when you think about student growth, teachers of color are more likely to see their students, and that means all students, but specifically Black students, as more gifted and talented. Too often our conversation is surrounds gifted and talented as this very special magnet, predominantly white program that you need to take a test in order to get into, right? But what teachers of color, and informally I can tell you, because, you know, as an educator of color myself, is understanding that there are multiple ways that students can show their brilliance. There are multiple ways that students can show up as gifted. There are multiple ways that students can actually adhere to standards, but still show the things that they can actually do. So too often our assessments are so narrow and they're so focused on that 2 or 3 hour test that happen at the end of the year that you lose out on the various ways that our students show up And so, for example, the idea of an oral test, being able to actually speak out what you know, those are things that educators of color are more likely to accept because they're like, oh, that kid seems to know what they're doing. And they're able to, readily tell you how they know what they know. Being able to do things that are written that are not necessarily in the standard or the King's English or whatever have you, right? Those are elements. And so as you keep talking about students, we need to keep recognizing that, yes, all of our students ought to be recognized as fully gifted, fully brilliant, fully talented in the ways that they show up. But we need folks who can actually recognize that, and teachers of color are more likely to do that. And so the added benefit of just having an educator of color who sees that isn't just for Black students. So that's what I would love to see. It's for every child to be able to see that. And so America can do a better job of doing that unless we just want to keep continuing the status quo that we see currently.
Oh, see, it was this. Listen, I don't even know where to start. I've been quiet for so long. I'm over here shaking. But really quickly, if y'all can share this, like this needs to be heard and seen far and wide. Everybody on this platform right now needs to share this conversation. It's not every day that you have these type of panelists, these Black kings, bringing some real to these internet streets. So y'all need to share this so that people can get involved in this conversation. Okay, so now what I was saying, I want to take it back to the historical where Jose went, and he talked about Brown versus Board of Education. I want everybody to go back there and listen to what he said about 34,000 Black teachers were gone afterward. That's all I'm gonna say about that, okay? So some things we need to start like really opening up to realize what we're really dealing with, structurally and systematically. It's a lot going on. But the pipeline piece is what I wanted to speak to. I think it was Dr. Ligon that talked about that pipeline. When I heard that word, it really made me start shaking because that's the truth. And we talked about it even in this conversation here that we need to go back to high school. I want to put on the table that we need to go earlier. Representation matters. Everybody's been saying it here. These babies need to see Black educators. They need to understand education. We need to have conversations. We need to have clubs around education. We need to have a structure where this pipeline is sustained and continuous from elementary school. I don't care if it's clubs or whatever we bring in. We have to start putting educators in their face. And I believe, I forgot who it was, but they talked about the negative talk even from the teachers about the field, right? Like, our children are going around, they're hearing teachers in the hallway, outside in the communities talking negatively about education. We have to stop that. Our community must stop that. I have 5-year-old twin grandgirls, and you better believe I'm not going to talk negatively about education around them because they need to understand the value. They need to see us moving in that field. And so the last thing I'm gonna say, and I'm be quiet, was the be good to be good. That right there, everybody need to go back and read that again and write it down and see what it means for you, because we know here at DTEC-TAG that education is a heart matter. I've heard it this morning, and we have to put a strong focus on building programs to get our education system where we know it needs to be for our children, because like they said in the beginning of this discussion, it wasn't built for us. Period.
It's true. So as Mr. Wilson said, when we talk about Brown versus the Board of Education, a lot of people don't know that they said, okay, we will bring these brown babies into the school, but what we're going to do is fire the Black educators that were teaching them within those segregated schools. And that kind of perception, that mentality has continued through the years, that Black and brown educators aren't necessarily as qualified. So when we talk about even gifted and talented programs for students, who's teaching those classes? And a lot of times it's not teachers of color. So let's think about the perceptions. So what perceptions about teachers of color and students of color might impact recruitment and hiring? Because those perceptions have to change. So sometimes we need to shed light on those. So what perceptions have you heard, directly or indirectly, about teachers of color and students of color that might impact recruitment and hiring?
I'll kick it off if you don't mind. I think one of the things that we've been working hard to address in a couple of contexts is this misnomer or belief that Black male educators are like just disciplinarians, or that Black educators or Latinx educators are don't have strong instructional practices and content knowledge, and that typically those things are just placed upon white females basically in the field. And we really have made it our business over the last several years to really focus on highlighting the strengths of Black male educators and Latinx educators, and looking to also put in the same level of intensity around their development, specifically around their pedagogy and their content knowledge, so that they're revered in that sense. And part of the reason why I'm even doing this dissertation on retention for Black male educators is because I left the classroom because I was tired of being a disciplinarian for like half the white teachers in my school. And I don't want that to be the case for the young kings that are coming behind me. And we really have to make sure that we are really removing that veil from educators when they come into our offices for interviews, or when we're looking for them in the various pipelines that we've been discussing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I saw a lot of head nods and a fist and acknowledgement. Any other thoughts on?
I wanted to add, like, through my role as a consultant, I've had the opportunity to work with hundreds of teachers all over, right? And so I remember there was a conversation where a teacher stated that all I care about is high quality mathematics, right? And so that's my whole focal point. So, and this was working with a large population of economically disadvantaged Black students. So the first issue that I had was, well, if you think that my whole focal point is high quality mathematics, then what are you saying about the students? That they don't deserve those opportunities? Because so then there's an issue with perspective. Like, the way you perceive these individuals and you see these kids is something that there's a bias that you don't realize that's deep seated within you, that's saying that these kids aren't capable of performing at a basic level that I would expect out of any other school. So when we're looking at the students that we are servicing, especially in communities of large populations of economically disadvantaged and highly Black or Latinx communities, there seems to be a stigma of people in that, hey, these individuals can't perform at a clip that is comparable to other subgroups or demographics within a school district or within other school districts. And then as a result, how is that reflected on us as grown-up educators when it comes to, providing that level of support? Are we only the disciplinarians? I had that same issue, and that's a primary reason I left. I had extremely good outcomes in very tough places to teach, and yet I wasn't given the opportunity to uplift and build the capacity within my fellow educators for them to be able to, for us to partner and work together to build strategies to replicate that throughout the school. Instead, it was like, man, we're going to give you all the worst of the worst, the tough of the tough. Oh, you got math and SPED certified, you good to go. And so, well, that's not focused on student achievement outcomes and moving kids. Like, when it comes, I work and make state assessments and all of that. Man, that stuff is just a baseline to make sure kids are learning, right? For me, it's about developing those critical thinking skills, and that's what I use mathematics for, in order for them to be able to have the skill set necessary to make whatever decision they need to make in life when they're faced with those obstacles. Like, the system itself in the game of education, because that's kind of how I look at it, is how well do you assimilate to following these rules and things of that nature versus, how are we raising our kids to be entrepreneurs and to transition beyond being employees for other people but to be able to like really grow their mindsets to go out and venture into whatever it is that they want to do. And I think like we put limitations on that based on the way that we perceive the kids as well as the people that we want working with the kids.
So I just had two things I wanted to add. You did a great job. The first thing, I need my instructional leaders to listen very carefully. When you're looking at a teacher, you're looking at bringing on a new teacher, don't expect that teacher to know everything right away. And don't just weed that teacher out, that prospective teacher out, because part of being an instructional leader is growing your teachers, is giving them the tools to be able to achieve. So when we're looking at a school system that uses a certain pedagogy, are those teacher pep programs teaching that pedagogy? If we're asking during an interview, are we asking in an appropriate way by saying, well, this teacher doesn't know that, by saying, how can I ask the question a little bit differently to possibly get at the answer that I want to receive or I want to hear. Second thing about this is that if I need my students to listen closely too. I need you to look closely at the data of the school system that you're looking at. Many of our teachers of color want to educate and want to teach students of color. So they may not be looking at that school system that they think doesn't have that student body and demographics. Look closely at the numbers of the school, because more than likely, there's schools within that system that you think may not have the demographics that may have that student population where you would want to teach at. So that was one of the ways I would say that we need to start looking at changing perception is our students. We need to think about outside the box on what those opportunities might be, where those student populations, where they may want to serve, is by looking a little bit deeper at the data, by looking at the school system as well.
I'll chime in on perceptions of students that negatively impact recruitment, retention of teachers, and the way children of color are treated. And I can do this best by telling a quick story. I grew up over here in a loving, well-disciplined home. Over here, there was a loving, disciplined, structured school that I attended. The streets in between, growing up in Mount Vernon, New York, were hard and treacherous. So oftentimes as a young man, I needed to develop a harsh exterior, a tone of voice, simply as a defense mechanism, simply as coping strategies. And perhaps I didn't always know how to turn it on and turn it off appropriately. So when I'm in school, that attitude, that tone may display itself as well. We have to know that beyond that facial expression, beyond that tone of voice,
yes,
there's a scared little baby inside, who is in need of nurturing and coddling way more than the punitive punishment that we often dole out, and that all impacts the way we talk about the profession. We're still using terms like bad kids and good kids, right? And teachers, novice teachers, thinking they've been assigned to a whole group of bad kids. And that's still negatively impacting who shows up and how we show up to do this work.
Good point, brother. Good point.
Outstanding point. And obviously that all impacts both recruitment and retention, which is what we're talking about. All of these things, they tie in together. And we noted that we're opening Pandora's box on this topic, and that we're not going to be able to answer or solve everything with this conversation. But one of the things that you all are doing is you're providing examples and a perspective that many people might not be thinking about. And they need to hear this in order to be intentional about making these changes. Because we also know that in many instances, there is a smaller number of people who look like us in positions to make changes regarding recruitment and retention. So they need to hear why it's important, the biases, the perceptions, and how they impact recruitment, hiring, and retention. So one of the things we want to kind of talk about in order to give people and understanding of this on another level is, what have you experienced? And you've mentioned this a little bit, especially when we talk about discipline, but what have you experienced or heard as reasons why teachers of color leave schools or the field altogether?
I actually wanted to add on to that part, and like I try to answer both questions from previous parts. One is that when we look at why teachers leave, usually there's this sort of interaction effect that social scientists kind of call when you have these intersectional elements at play, right? So generally speaking, like the people that I know that have left the profession don't leave because of the kids. It's never the kids, right? It's always about any number of structural changes that have happened, or structural inequities, or things that have happened above them, and things that they felt that were out of their control. Whether it be teacher pay, all the things that people talk about generally with teachers, it becomes an even worse issue when it comes to issues related to teachers of color, right? The second part that I also want to highlight too that hasn't been brought up is this idea that, specifically with my Black and Latinx women, right, who maybe a veteran generation, have been taught so often, have seen how they have been expected to stay at a school that it's about to be shut down, taken over, or whatever have you by the state, right? So any number of structural changes that happen with that, and then of course the Black women who have to stay, the Latin women who have to stay, right? And then it's like, oh, so like there is a gender issue that's happening there as well. So like while my Black brothers and Latinx brothers often may get an opportunity to rise up, or if not, just outright leave altogether, a lot of the folks who are women presenting have to stay, and that's a thing that it's a weird structural thing that happens, but it's an unfortunate thing that we need to address. And then this is third part right here too that we haven't addressed at all, which is that our LGBTQIA folks who do go into spaces that are actively hostile against that specific part of their identity, that crucial part of their identity, that they don't get to show up in that way because of professionalism or whatever have you, that ends up being an element as to why they leave. So we need to be conscientious of these things that Dr. Monique Morris brings up when it comes to push out. When we even think about the work of David Johns, for example, and the work of LGBTQIA folks who are trying to do this work within our educational spaces, but then just generally speaking, right? How do we listen up? How do we listen and show up for our people who are going through any number of different issues structurally? And how do we do that as individuals? And those are moments where we can actually build stronger community as a result, or in spite of, or because of all the different oppressions that are happening at the school site.
You brought up a number of important factors, but what the phrase that you used, community, a lot of times that's why people leave, because they don't feel like they are part of the community. So whether they're Black, Brown, Latinx, the LGBTQI community, that's huge. And I think that's something that is missing from the conversation and the planning. How do you create community? And that means all of the factors, all of the bias, and the perceptions, negative perceptions, and how they impact embracing people as a community. So that's very, very important.
I would like to add also that, and by no means am I taking a shot at any school district, but I think it's important that we have to acknowledge that teachers also leave schools because of leadership. And there's research out there to show people don't leave jobs, they leave supervisors. Well, that's true in education as well. And it has been my experience that oftentimes we're promoting or elevating the wrong people into leadership roles. You may know instruction and can just teach, but that doesn't mean you can lead a school. And so we have to be intentional. HR, this is on us. We have to be intentional that we are building a program to make sure that if we are going to take our strong teachers and make them leaders, we're giving them the tools that they need in order to be successful. Otherwise, it's going to be a revolving door within those buildings.
Totally agree. Go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to add one thing, is that we have to talk about cultural taxation as well on our teachers, and just being heavily burdened because they take on so much of responsibility of trying to educate the students that they feel are not getting what they need from all educators. And that can be very taxing on them. So cultural taxation is a real thing, and it leads to burnout. And having burnout leads to teachers leaving the profession because they simply emotionally have had enough. So I just wanted to make that statement is something that we have to also look to consider as well as cultural taxation.
I'll add a couple points here. Our good brother, who I fell out in love with, but I'm going to invite him to come back home, Tavis Smiley, once said that when America catches a cold, Black America catches pneumonia, right? And I fell out in love with my good brother because of how he treated our former president. But like I said, he can always come home. But so let me talk about how teachers are leaving the profession writ large and why. First of all, as I said earlier, we need to better teacher compensation without a shadow of a doubt. That said, it's interesting. As I have conversations, both as a principal and a superintendent, with people who have left the profession, left teaching, very rarely do I hear compensation brought up at that moment. Lack of support is brought up. The job is hard, okay? Trying to teach 25 kindergarten kids their colors and how to read and how to count, that's hard. Trying to convince a classroom full of 13-year-olds that you ought to pay attention and learn how to manipulate the quadratic formula, that is hard. The work is hard, and we fall short of the necessary support systems in schools and school districts. Outsized expectations. Right now, we're seeing through this pandemic, America has created a whole laundry list of expectations, needs, and wants from school systems, and teachers, but we're not investing in those systems as if we are so dependent on them, right? So last, I gotta be critical here. I'm letting it go around the table, and that's parent and community leadership and support, okay? Regardless of your background, your education ability, and all that kind of good stuff, there's no reason why a parent, a pastor, a little league coach, someone in that community can't instill in that child, I bet not hear a phone call from that school about your behavior. There's no reason why we all can't do that. And then last but not least, across the nation, we have not elevated our teachers to the social and professional pedestal that they are deserving of. We didn't always do that with our women, men who serve in our military. We didn't always do that. We would criticize the soldier because of the decisions of the politician. Well, we've evolved as a nation, and now we know, and we treat our men and women in uniform who serve in the military, they're up on a pedestal in our world, right? We need to do the same thing for teachers. Teachers deserve to be up on a social and professional pedestal.
So this is perfect because we're gonna kind of talk about that, the narrative. So when we explore the impact of poor retention, and I want to back up. Again, I love the statement of you bet not get a call from this teacher. It's important because that goes back to community. But as when we explore the impact of poor retention, we have to acknowledge the fact that teachers have to remain in the field and have experience in order to become administrators on the school level, on the district level, on the state and the federal level. These are all positions that impact change. So knowing the importance of having a seat at the table and, more importantly, a voice to influence policies and actions, it kind of goes to your point. How do we change the narrative about recruiting and retaining teachers of color to elevate it from being just in good intentions, like we need to do this, but it's just a good intention, to being a strategic, intentional, and measurable action?
will jump in really quickly. Just to talk about this for a minute. I think it starts at the top. I think that whole seat at the table piece is really, really, really important when you talk about strategy. I think that's why it's important that we see who's going to be in that seat called the Department of Education. So it starts at the top, I believe. And I think you got to have the right people there to have the discussions, to collaborate, to create the strategic plan, intentionally knowing what the outcomes are going to be. So we have a lot of wonderful programs across the nation, right? Within colleges, within the community, but it's a lot of silos. It's a lot of hodgepodge, a lot of funding going into some things. So I think we have to find a way at the top to come together as one, looking through the same lens, and then go out and spread that model that we have learned works. You know, we have a lot of research out here. We have a lot of models that work, and it's time for us to come together a bit more strategically at our community, bringing the right people to the table, making sure you have all perspectives at the table, because we keep spinning wheels. And we all know that this was built not for us. So we have to be able to shift that narrative. We have to be able to debunk and tear down some things and build up what we know our community needs, using federal funding, private funding, whatever fundings we get, so that our efforts are amplified, right? So that we have more impact across the nation. So that's just my insight on how we shift that narrative.
I want to jump in on this point. I think one of the big things that we kind of don't really spend a lot of time focusing on is policy agenda for those individuals in policy making positions, right? When I did my dissertation research, I was focused on a state policy that essentially invested in charter school companies to come and set up shop within a 5-mile radius of a low performing school. And those schools generally were schools that were elementary schools with large populations of economically disadvantaged Black students, right? So it was $140 million a year investment, with money going over to the next year if it wasn't spent each year. And that thing is just really getting up and running. So when you say, well, where's the investment in the people within the community and within the kids? Because if you got that kind of money that you can invest in the establishment of charter school industries or competing schools, then why can't we make that investment into the school itself, into the community itself, in order to mitigate a lot of the factors that are impacting these kids before they even come into the school? And so that's like one of the big things, is that people have agendas that are economic based, that have nothing to do with what's going on actually in the world that we work in and dealing with issues. And so, like, the reality is we keep trying to make it work and fit within these systems. And to your point, we probably should leverage, we have churches, we have people within the community, we have the charter school approach, and leverage those opportunities in order to build our own to service us the way we need to, versus trying to make something that was never built for us to continue to work for us. And we see the outcome.
I agree 100%. I think you're so spot on with those comments. And you're making me really think a little bit about how I could bring that home. I think some other related points are, the seat at the table piece is very important, what the sister said earlier. I do think that Board of Educations will nod and agree for decisions that ultimately get results, because student achievement largely is like the kind of biggest target that school districts are looking for. And I think, if you share data, which we've talked about throughout the conversation today, that equates student performance with the retention of Black educators, there's probably going to be a large propensity for Board of Education to get on board. The second piece is that, everyone knows that for us to put this into reality, we have to ensure that we're putting dollars behind this. And I think it's important that when we are looking at our budgets, that we cut out some of the stuff that we know is just realistically not going to help us to support the districts and schools that we're working in. And, that's one of the things that we really, I've taken a huge step back to say, cutting, a lot of the fat, so to speak, from my budget over the last several years and really putting those monies towards some of the other initiatives I spoke about earlier. The last thing I'll say is that there's a bit of, for this to become strategic, we have to help to change the mindset. And part of that is sharing data and research. And I would encourage everyone, there's a McKinsey data article that just came out, or study that just came out about the impact of COVID on communities of color and Black and Latinx students that I just read. And after reading it, I automatically sent it to my board and was like, let's have an offline conversation about this. And the thinking behind this is that I want my board to know that I'm going to need to look into some additional funding sources over the next several years to close this new opportunity academic gap that has widened because of COVID. And obviously it's not related, it's not the same thing, but I think the big idea is that we want to be able to sell the thinking that we have with the powers that be that are making these big decisions about how we use our funds to support retention or recruitment efforts for Black educators and Latinx educators.
So this is huge because you're highlighting a need. And what happens is when you have experience or you live in that space, when you're paying attention to the needs of our students and community, then you can highlight that need, bring it to the attention of policy and decision makers as part of that team of policy and decision makers. But if we're not there to bring things to light, and we're looking at people that don't look like us, and they're just thinking about what impacts their lives, we're missing those opportunities to elevate certain needs. So this goes to exactly why we need to think about the recruitment and retention of teachers of color. Because if you're not living in that space to be aware of those needs, you're not going to make, again, intentional and strategic decisions that impact our students. So it's a really good point that you made. You saw an article and you elevated it. So anyone else, any other thoughts on just changing the narrative?
I actually wanted to add on too, because structurally, 13,000 plus school districts in the entire United States. 13,000. People forget that we are not one unified United States when it comes to our public schools, much less our private schools, our independent schools, our charter schools, with any number of hybrids like that. Consider how each of these spaces has their own level of jurisdiction when it comes to hiring and retaining any number of educators. So they have that lever that unfortunately doesn't sit in the U.S. Department of Education, regardless of whether we have a proponent of these movements, such as John King, for example, who is a big proponent of making sure that educators of color were at the bully pulpit, or you have somebody who on the opposite side of that spectrum, like Betsy DeVos. Generally speaking, it has been the folks who have decided to look at the table, reanalyze the table, and had wished to reorganize that table overall. We need more than just seats. We need to reorganize the table writ large. So I think I'm happy to see some of the movements that have come out in recent years around trying to develop a cadre of educators of color, whether it be the Black Teachers Project that is housed in Oakland as well as New York City, the Center for Black Teacher Development over in Philly, the Abolitionist Teachers Network with Bettina Love. There's any number of grassroots organizations who are trying to make sure that it isn't just about changing the faces of the teaching profession. It's also about changing the whole direction of the whole ship, right? We have to understand that we can't do this thing where we just change who the person looks like, but the entire direction just continues to throw us out. So when you think about Richard Ingersoll's work, he had noticed that we are right now at the point where we are at the highest clip of recruiting educators of color into the profession in the United States. However, we're also seeing that teachers are leaving faster than the white counterparts, And that's also the highest clip that we've seen too, right? So there are these different balances there are these different things that we need to learn how to balance out, which is that when it comes to this narrative around teachers of color is that we have a lot of data. We have a lot of people who have experiences all up and down this right column that you're seeing on the screen. Excellent folks who can probably give us some really good ways for us to think about this locally. But if we don't collectively come together and say, all right, we need to reorganize this table because it's hurting our babies, then we're going to continue to see the things that we're seeing now. And so I implore everyone to continue to think structurally about how we can do this from the bottom up, and then think about what that top-down structure might look like to sustain the work that is happening right now in so many grassroots spaces.
Yeah, to your point, research informed policy decisions is something that is like highly lacking in our space, right? And when you look at the thing that you just said, as far as the relationship between Black and white, our teachers of color and white teachers, and the rate that they're leaving, I would argue and say, you know, what schools are teachers of color being put into in comparison to the schools that most of our counterpart teachers of white teachers are being put into, and how does that influence those outcomes as far as the rate of who's leaving? And the research will bear out and show, you know, like I've seen it anecdotally just going from district to district. When I go to suburban schools, it's not a lot of us, you know, but if I come to a school or school district that has a large economically disadvantaged population, like we're there. And it's a totally different experience in working in those different type schools. And that's, as someone said earlier, the cultural taxation and the weight, it's a lot to work in a school that is, it's a lot to work in a school environment in a community that doesn't have the economic resources like a lot of other schools do. And when you have those economic resources, like just because of what people are paying in property tax alone, the impact and the influence that they have on that school and what they provide and support is way different than the opposite. So those are the things that I want people to pay attention to and take in consideration and utilize research and making policy decisions. But I'm wishful thinking.
Well, we're starting the conversation so that people know that it's important and that we need to be intentional about it. And again, make sure that it's not just a talking point, that we're moving forward with that. So thank you. Any other thoughts on that one? Because that one's huge. So one of the things, like we're talking about policy and organizations, and while we're working on that, one of the things that we should also think about are the people that are right now in the field, because if we don't retain those teachers, then we don't have this group to do the work that we're talking about on all levels, top down, bottom up, all the sides, everything. So what can we do to support our teachers of color to not only be successful, but to remain professionally and emotionally supported so that they stay in the field? Because again, there are people listening that like they haven't been able to do that yet. So what are some suggestions, ideas, thoughts?
I was going to throw out there, the first thing is we just have to invest in the people. So how are we providing opportunities to elevate those individuals' voices so they can have influence on the decisions that's being made that are affecting them? So that's first and foremost before anything. How are we going from Capitol Hill or wherever your state legislation is, or even your district office, and getting involved with the individuals on the ground level and getting their input and asking them questions to see how they can help, you know, cultivate policy that's going to be more supportive of them and the challenges that they're faced with.
So I totally agree from a policy and systemic standpoint. So much of what we're talking about here this morning, we've been talking about literally for years and perhaps even decades. And the common question is, well, why haven't we received the traction that we desire? And from my vantage point in schools and school districts, there are these two buckets: a must-have bucket and a nice-to-have bucket. We have items and strategies and beliefs over here in this must-have bucket where, like, we literally will not go on until a certain decision is made, a certain advancement made, and a certain achievement, accomplishment is created. Like, the life will just cease to exist, okay? But over here, when it comes to diversity and hiring and support and equitable treatment and those pieces, it's in our nice to have bucket. We discuss strategies and we hope that someone or enough people take these strategies seriously and then implement accordingly. One of the things we can do, I think it's an inside out game. If we were talking basketball, I think you have to infiltrate and I think you have to agitate. So when it comes to infiltrate, right now on this panel, I think most of us are within systems, working within systems to trying to dismantle. We are infiltrating. We need to value and respect and connect and build the capacity of those people on the outside of the system to agitate the hell out of the system, even the ones that we work for. Okay, even the ones that we work for, because what I've seen is that I've seen literally miracles happen in schools and school systems just because a handful of the right people said a handful of the right things to a small handful of some influential people. And we need to take advantage of those strategies.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I was going to add this one strategy that we utilize. I'm going to turn it on to my brother Corey. And the second is that, providing those safe space for our teachers of color to be able to have conversation in those affinity groups. And that's something that we've been working on. We have a Latino leadership cohort that we work on. We also have a Black male affinity group that Corey helps to lead. And maybe I'll turn it over to Corey to kind of talk a little bit about that work that we're doing within APS as a strategy to help support and emotionally support our professionals of color.
Thanks, Aaron. So yes, we do have a Black male affinity group with Arlington Public Schools. We also have a Latino male affinity group as well. And so it came to bear, initially, my plan was to leverage those Black men to help me recruit additional teachers. And so they paused and said, hey, brother, we want to help you, but we need support here, because we got one foot out the door. And I was like, oh, gosh, I thought I had this group, ready to, fight the fight. And so now we get together monthly. We talk about some of the challenges that they have. Where we can implement change, we do. And where I need to take it to executive level, I do. And so it's been a pretty good experience for us. And so we're casting a wider net. And so we're going to open it up to other minority groups. But that was the first group that we started with, because when we looked at our numbers, we saw that while we do have a significant number of Black teachers within Arlington, there's room for opportunity to grow that in terms of the Black male teachers. But I guess that's the case for most districts, getting additional Black male teachers within education. And so that's our goal. It's just a support system for them, because oftentimes people just want to be heard, and you want to give them that safe space. And some of the brothers I hired personally, I had some relationships with, and others, no idea. And I was overwhelmed by the level of openness that they shared some of the things with me, some of the schools that I thought that were on the right track with having a diverse and inclusive environment. I learned that that's not the case. And so, those are just some of the strategies that we have here at Arlington Public Schools.
I think I would also encourage, go ahead. I think I heard someone else. Go ahead. So I thank you. I would also encourage schools and districts to look at allowing Black and Latinx teachers to just be their authentic self. And what Angela and I, we know a teacher we went to school with who I've connected with over the years. And she recently told me that her principal told her, you need to tone down a little bit. I think you're just being a little too political. And apparently that came from like social media posts that she was posting about the riots and about some recent riots that recently happened. And if I go back to my classroom experience, I remember a teacher, a Black female teacher, being told to switch up her hairstyle because it was too provocative. And obviously these may be some outlying cases, but from anecdotally, from what I've seen in the profession, like this stuff is happening all the time. And I think it's just important that, you know, we really acknowledge that these are things that are going to get people to say, you know what, I'm stepping out of this role. I don't need to deal with this kind of crap. Another thing is that I think it's important that we have growth conversations with our teachers of color, and that school leaders sit down and we talk about, all right, what do you think the next 5 years, like, what do you think you'd like to aspire to do within our district? What do you think you'd like to aspire within our school? And then not just have those growth conversations, but then also think about, okay, if this person wants to, you know, be on PLC, lead PLCs, like what are the things that we need to embed in that person's work over the next several years to help this person do this? So if this person wants to have my job 5 years from now, like let's make sure that we are putting in the right support so that that person can aspire to that. I think helping that, having those conversations, and I did that often throughout all of the years of being a principal, not just with Black teachers or Latinx teachers, but all my teachers, that helped with my retention in my school. It helped with my ability to literally paint the picture for what folks could do in the profession long term. I do want to apologize. I'm loving this conversation. I'm actually in school right now this weekend, and I do need to log off in a few moments. So I just want to also say goodbye. And I really will hope that we can keep in contact and get our contact information. I learned so much from all of you today, but I have to jump into class in literally like 2 minutes. So I want to say goodbye, but I definitely look forward to staying in contact with everyone.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we are going to continue the conversation, and we'll talk about it in a moment. A follow-up symposium in April, so hopefully we can bring you all back together and continue the conversation. So thank you, Mr. Palmore. Appreciate it. So there were a couple of things that were said and weren't said, and there's so many things. It's keeping track of things, but I want to go back a little bit. So Dr. Cruz-Craig, you have mentioned something when we talk about making sure that people's voices are heard. And you made a statement probably a year or two ago that stuck with me about people going to board meetings and sharing their thoughts, but not just one person, bringing a group together. Can you kind of expand upon that?
Yeah, I think it starts before that particular type of action. I think we have to start with what we have with DTEC-TAG and other programs across the nation, those safe spaces that were just talked about, right? Where those affinity groups where you bring Black and Latinx, educators together to be able to spill out their heart, right? Without worrying about a write-up, without worrying about being fired, without worrying about those things, where they can truly, truly, truly talk about the taxing emotional stuff that's on them. I think that's a form of therapy. I think we know those that's a part of DTEC-TAG. Every time we get together and we talk about these things, we end up in tears. We're literally crying on each other's shoulders in these safe spaces because of the weight that we all carry as educators. So before we can get to a board meeting as a group to talk and know what we're talking about and have a spokesperson identified and we're strategic, we got to be able to work through what we're going through. We have to find those strategies that work for us to keep us mentally stable, to keep our emotional intelligence intact, to deal with our implicit biases, right? To deal with these stereotype threats. And once we deal with it and we get this group of people that can move in sync, that's that power right there. When you move in sync, you know when those board meetings are, know when those county commissioner meetings are. A lot of that stuff is virtual now, y'all. Ain't no excuse. There's no excuse. You know when they are, you plan to go meet up and have brunch and your mimosas. We plan everything else. We need to plan to advocate on purpose with power in large numbers. Somebody said it, I can't remember which one it was, but one of these kings here said, the right people talking to the right group of people, saying the right things. Like, that's the thing. And when we all get our hearts right, and we're in this thing for the right reason, all of that will align divinely. And we also have to move past ourselves so that we can be bold and confident. So when that time arises, because sometimes we only get one opportunity, we got to be ready to open our mouth and say what we need to say. I started to say, thus says the Lord, but I ain't going to take it there. Okay. But we need to be ready. Be ye always ready to open your mouth and say what needs to be said. And you can't do it afraid. Listen, I'm going to leave it here. Good trouble. Individually, collectively, collaboratively, what they going to do if everybody stand up?
Whew. All right. I just have to say, this has been an amazing discussion. I just appreciate all of the input, the expertise, the experiences that you've shared. One of the things I want to do is, if there are any questions that were in any of our social media, whether YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, that the team behind the scenes wants to elevate to share with the panel, I just want to spend a couple minutes being able to do that, and then allow each of the panelists to have some closing statements. But this has been outstanding. So give us a minute. So there are amazing comments. So gentlemen, and Dr. Cruz Craig, when you finish, just go through the comments, definitely, to see what people are saying, because what you've shared has resonated with people. So it's what we need right now in this world. Trying to see.
Yeah, I think this one can be pulled apart a little bit here, Angela.
Right, I'm looking, let's see. I'll read it and then we'll kind of break it down. The mentality of several principles. This is from Miss Ricks, that was posted online. The mentality of several principles is that if a teacher is Black, they often have the student with the most behavioral challenges and lowest academic challenges. And we've discussed this. This makes it appear that these teachers are not as good as non-teachers of color, who seem to never get the students with these challenges. How do we prevent this from continuously happening? Any thoughts?
Well, I was just going to say, we have to talk about it. We need to raise awareness. So you need to call it out on the table for what it is when you're having those conversations with the principal. If that doesn't work, then go to, above. But I would start there first by having the conversations. If we don't escalate it to the point where we notice it, we bring it to light, then it's never going to change. So one of the things that, Mr. Dotson said, hey, we had teachers that said we had one foot out of the door. Well, why? Because we're only experiencing students that are behavior challenges, and we want to do more. We're not getting an opportunity to teach AP courses. So we immediately had to take action and say, look, we're going to look into this, but we have to lead with data. Just making a comment without having data doesn't suffice within the education realm. So we have to start leading with our data. But I think that's a good starting place by calling it out on the table so that we can address it more appropriately.
In addition to that, we have to reward individuals for coming forth and looking to break the status quo instead of penalizing them for being great at what they do. So to the point of what he's saying, and elevating their voices to advocate for these things, like what's the incentive to do so versus, hey, the status quo allows me to stay quiet, get paid, and do my thing, and I just make whatever impact I can in my space versus growing.
We also have to be able to name white supremacy as a core tenet of the teaching profession, as it were, because the input is as important as the output, right? And so if we're seeing a population that is dominated by white folks, specifically white women, then it's to our benefit for us to say, hey, like, there are values that are being instilled in any number of teachers, including our administrators, who, there's a lot of folks who are saying, this Black teacher, they're not going to be good for our magnet kids or our gifted and talented kids. But think back to what I just said about what it means to be gifted and talented, and then fast forward to now, where we're consistently seeing situations where so many of our kids are frustrated with their own experiences in school because they're not being seen as gifted and talented. They're not being seen as included or belonging in a school setting. And so that leads too often to so much of the cultural barriers that we have to push against as adults, and of course multiplied as children, right? That's what leads to the school to confinement pipeline. Shout out to Monique Morris on that. But then the last bit I kind of want to make before I too need to start attending to my own doctoral studies in a few minutes is consider how the work of Vanessa Siddle Walker, who you all need to go read, The Lost Education of Horace Tate. I'll put it in the chat for folks to amplify. When you read that book, you recognize that our Black educators are, talented temp, are folks who we love to look up to, right? They thought that the best lessons that we could teach our Black children were about citizenship, democracy, and giving back to their communities. It wasn't about exams. It wasn't about assessment. All these things are really important, but they were all in the service of assuring that everybody felt like they were a human being in this country that so often dehumanized them. And so coming out of a legacy of slavery, which just only recently happened, when you think about the whole trajectory of like from 1492, even 1619 to like now, consider all that, right? And how for only a few years in relation to like that big history, have Black people been free, and only conditionally, if you look at the 13th Amendment really like religiously, right? Consider what that looks like for educators of color. Consider what that looks like for teachers of color. Consider that so many of our white educators continue to perpetuate this idea that, we are not as equal as them. And so with that said, right, it is really important for people to reframe what it means to be a good and qualified teacher. We have to stand in that power, and we need to say to ourselves, this is a moment for us to really recognize that teachers of color, specifically Black teachers, need to stand in our power and say once and for all, we are fully human beings, and our concerns, our values, and our communities matter in this moment in time.
I love it. I love it. In 2017, the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics said that pretty much 80% of the teaching population identifies as non-Hispanic white, and only about 7% identify as non-Hispanic Black. So when you think about that, to your point, there's so many instances where not only students but other professionals haven't engaged with teachers of color. And when we look at the places where we're mentioning people are placed, whether they're dealing with students with behavior issues, special education services, where students have been historically over-identified as having special needs, one of the things that happens is when teachers are elevated to a place where students and other professionals and parents don't see them, sometimes there's pushback. I have an amazing colleague who is an AP teacher, and students walked into the classroom and stopped and looked like, wait, is this my teacher? And during parent-teacher conferences, the same things. The parents walked in and looked like, what, am I in the wrong room? So we really need to think about the impact of this on all levels. And when we talk about systemic racism that's ingrained in our educational system, those are the subtle things that people don't think about. And when teachers face that, it's another reason why people also end up leaving the profession or getting frustrated. So what I want to do is respect everyone's time. Thank you. Again, we know it's a Saturday and you all have an amazing workload because you are doing the work out there for our teachers and students and families and communities. So I want to give each of you just an opportunity to share some parting words or thoughts. And you can just go in any order that you like.
I would just yield that if we can let King Jose go first, because I know he said he had to go to his doctoral studies. So King Jose, can you come and lead us out with the closing statements?
I'm always going to say this, and I want to be very thankful to Angela and the rest of the team for inviting me. Whenever I get an invite like this, it's never a matter of if, but when, and y'all need to know that. The second thing is the brilliance that has shown up today is not, it's special, but we have so many more folks who can keep doing this work. And as long as we continue to push on this idea of community, as long as we continue to push on this idea of making sure that our babies actually matter, their lives matter, and no one can tell us different, that we start from the idea that they ought to be valued and honored, then we're doing the best job possible. So I want to thank you all for your time, and much love to y'all. Be good to yourselves. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us today. All right, Mr. Greg.
So just want to say, thanks and the opportunity of being here. It's so important for us to have the conversation, but, so important for me because I'm able to see other educators that look like me. And I never had that growing up. So the more that we talk about it, the more that we normalize it, the better we're able to operationalize it and make it into a reality. It's not going to, unless this is a strategic imperative that we make the change and we make this shift, it's not going to happen. So we're going to have to be strategic. We're going to have to look at our policies, our practices, and our procedures that put these barriers up so that we're able to remove them. So thanks for the conversation. I look forward to February.
Outstanding. Thank you. Thank you.
I'll add appreciative comments to our beautiful sisters who put all of this together and did what Black women have been doing, and that is you led the way for us this morning. As a community, we've ridden the backs of our Black women, and so just thank you sincerely. And I would just leave with this one comment. We've talked about large, dynamic, multifaceted problems that don't have easy one-step answers. And I actually learned that from a calculus professor back in college who said, Desmond, I hand you multi-dimensional problems and you hand me one-step solutions. You ought to know you're wrong as soon as you hand me a simple solution to a complicated problem, right? So I would just advise us all, against the complexities that we discussed here today, pick a lane, pick a couple of areas and run that lane. For me, whether you're Black, brown, yellow, green, wherever you come from, if you're teaching children, and especially children from systemically underserved communities, I want to have something to say about your development and your coaching. If you are a principal or a superintendent in a district, regardless of where you come from, and the majority of your kids are systemically underserved kids, I want to help you build your efficacy in designing those enabling conditions to help teachers help kids. And there's a whole lot of the problem that I've left out, but I'm to pick a lane and run that.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate that because you focus as opposed to going wide. Focus. Pick a lane. Love it.
I can go next. Thank you so much for affording me the opportunity to participate in today's panel discussion. I just want to say that we're doing great work. It's going to be taxing, it's going to be exhausting, but don't give up. Keep pushing ahead. It's good trouble because it matters. Just like I had a bad teacher in high school with math, but I also had two great teachers, Mr. Loach and Miss D, that impacted me tremendously. And so you matter, you make a difference. And I think it's important that we continue to push this work forward to make sure that we have people in front of our kids that actually care about them as a human being. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I guess to close out for the gentleman on the panel and Miss Beautiful Dr. Cruz as well, I want to thank you all again for just inviting me, having this opportunity to learn from all the individuals here. This has been a great conversation. We're in a moment in time right now that's not been like any moment before it. And I really want us to kind of take hold to that. Things are changing. We're really changing what's been the status quo, and we're breaking the wheel. I just ask that everybody continue to push forward, continue to elevate your voices and advocate for what you believe in order to make the change that we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. So I guess it's me, Angela.
Yes, it is Dr. Cruz Craig.
Before we throw it back to you, I first want to say thank you. Thank you to the DMV TAG team. Thank you to all of the TAG equity warriors for showing up. I've seen so many in the comments, and we got the tech people in the back doing their thing. We have an amazing team, and I am so honored and blessed to be on this journey with each of them. To the kings on the panel, thank you. Thank you for raising your voice. Thank you for sharing your heart. Thank you for staying in the work, in the fight, because it's something that we have to continue and consistently be able to do. And thank you for being leaders. You know, we don't find great king leaders often in education. It's always a whole lot of hoopla. So I appreciate you all for being who you are and saying yes to this team to come onto this platform and share what you're doing and where you're doing it. What I would say to everyone to close out is do something. Do something. Make something happen. Advocacy is an action word, and we need to do something. Every week, you should put something on your to-do list to do something around advocacy in education, if that's your heart. So that's what I would leave to everybody. I don't care where you are across the country. I don't care where you serve, as a teacher, as a parent, as a grandma, as an uncle. Find your, let he say what he say, pick a lane and run that lane. See where you fit in and do something. Go find organizations in your community that you can latch on to, that you can bring your gifts and talents to. You are needed. Your voice is needed. Your heart is needed. Link up and amplify this advocacy work. It's up to us to make sure our future, which are our children, are equipped to continue to lead forth our communities and sustain this change that we're all putting our heart and souls into. We're out here sweating. You might not see it, but these educators that's still in this thing today are sweating every day. They're sacrificing every day. Their families, their finances, their emotional health, their mental health, they're fighting for everybody's children, and everybody needs to be in the fight. So make it happen. Do something. And if you don't go out there and do something, shut up. Keep your mouth shut if you're not doing what you can do. I don't care where you see it. It's something that you can do. And that's all I got to say.
All right. Well, that's a powerful way to end the morning. So just thank you all. Thank you so much. So what we want to do is just, again, thank everyone in the audience. Thank all of our panelists, everyone, for participating, joining us today. And we wanted to just let you know about our upcoming events. So our next event will be a session on self-care for educators, and that will be in February. And we'd also like you to know that you can just follow us on social media to see what's going on, how the work is continuing. We have a number of events that bring educators and advocates together, because this is what we're doing. We're advocating for our teachers. We're advocating for our students. We're advocating for the future. So now we'll share with you the work of DTEC-TAG throughout the nation with our collaborating teams. And we hope to see you at our next event. Thank you.
But we need numbers. We need to show up at school board meetings. We need to show up at county commissioner meetings. We need to have someone on the agenda to talk and know what they're